6 months ago, I submitted an abstract to IFM with the title The Korsakowian Approach, a metamodern method that shapes the thinking patterns of those who apply it. Meanwhile, I changed my thinking, and as a consequence, this talk is about why the title of my talk is wrong. To keep this brief, I will not talk about metamodernism, a concept Judith Aston linked to iDocs. For more details on how I think metamodernism is related to Korsakowian practice, please check out the talk I gave at the Mobile Studies Congress in December last year. Today I will talk about multiperspectivity and its counterpart, monoperspectivity, and thereby I hope to illuminate the understanding of what Korsakowian practice is and what it is good for. How I got to where I am. For those of you who don't know me, I am the guy who invented Korsakow, a software system that is commonly thought of as a tool to create interactive documentary. Korsakow came into being in 2000, and since then it became the center of my life and my thinking. For the first 15 years, my energy mostly went into producing Korsakow projects, Korsakow films, Korsakow installations, Korsakow shows. And after that, I moved my focus more towards reflecting and trying to understand what I vaguely describe as the magic of Korsakow. My turn towards research was inspired by people like Matt Soar, Judith Aston, Adrian Miles and others who I had the privilege to get to know personally, not so much through their writing as I did not have the necessary academic skills. For many years, I did my private research in a style that 𝗽𝗺 calls cowboy research. 2.5 years ago, I was granted the opportunity to quit my day job and fully focus on my research. I'm currently doing a practice-based PhD, and in this talk, I want to report where I am currently at. My autoethnographic research. After spending quite a bit of time wrestling with the system and trying to learn academic languaging, I turned towards autoethnography with a focus on my first works, which includes the reconstruction of my very first computer-based narrative work called Small World, which I made in 1997, the piece with which the whole story started, and that later led to Korsakow. Small World could be described as a nonlinear interactive slideshow and is in many ways the predecessor of Korsakow, the software tool that is still being used today. Small World puts flashlights on 54 data points of what it is like to grow up in a small town, or more concretely, what I experienced growing up in a small town in Bavaria. Back then, I built Small World in Macromedia Director, a software that later became Adobe Director and which later went the way of all earthly things and largely disappeared into obsolescence. I'm currently in the process of reconstructing Small World in Korsakow. You can take a look at the states of affairs here. The thesis with which I started my PhD, and which is also reflected in the title of this talk, is that my particular way of working with Korsakow, which I call korsakowian, has shaped my thinking in a way for which I have been using the term multiperspectival. What do I mean by multiperspectival? Being multiperspectival is the habit, or one could say the pleasure or compulsion of looking at, considering and understanding things from as many perspectives as possible. It is a particular pleasure for someone who is multiperspectival to hold contradictory or even mutually exclusive perspectives in their head at the same time. It is like juggling, and the more balls you can keep in the air, the greater the pleasure. On the other hand, there is the monoperspective, which assumes that there is one best perspective from which to understand the world and strives to find this perspective. People with a multi-perspectival disposition are characterized by the fact that they are always delighted when someone comes along with a clever thought that renders their own system of thought obsolete, or at least reveals a perspective that makes them say, "Oh, I never thought of it that way." There can never be such a thing as truth for someone who is multi-perspectival, as all perspectives can never be considered. Monoperspectival people, on the other hand, strive to find the best perspective, and once this perspective has been identified, they tend to propagate and defend it. Monoperspectival people generally feel little pleasure when their ideas are criticized and viewed from different perspectives that contradict their own. Multiperspectival people, on the other hand, are often extremely skeptical when one perspective is presented to them as an unquestionable truth. This is of course a very and possibly oversimplistic depiction. Of course, no binary distinction can be made, so one should rather imagine a scale with monoperspectival on one side and multiperspectival on the other. Individuals then tend to lean in one direction or the other. People are often topic-dependent, mono or multi-perspectival. Experts tend to develop a more multi-perspectival view in the field of their expertise. They see things in a differentiated way and do not take a single viewpoint. However, the multi-perspectival view in one subject area does not prevent monoperspectival experts from not transferring the realization that things are complex and ambiguous to all other areas. To be clear, there is no judgment associated with mono or multi-perspectivity. Both have advantages and disadvantages. I talked about this in my talk at the 𝗽𝗁𝗁𝗃 Symposium, Crisis and Multi-Perspective Thinking in May 2020. The talk is documented on my blog. I have so far assumed that my style of working with Korsakow, the Korsakowian approach, which I would describe as an extremely open approach to any topic, that this Korsakowian exercise was formative for my multi-perspectival thinking. This is how I have perceived it so far, that the Korsakowian approach has reinforced my multi-perspectivity. My autoethnographic research now suggests something else, which my mother would simply describe as, "I have always been like that." This in turn would suggest that it is not so much the medium and the way of using that particular medium that makes the thinking, but rather that a medium allows or makes possible a certain way of thinking that is already inherent in the individual. This is also suggested by a series of intensive conversation I had with other practitioners in the field of interactive documentary. In this context, the dust has fallen from my eyes. I have never succeeded in convincing anyone of the Korsakowian approach who has not already practiced multi-perspectival thinking in the first place. Conversely, it can also be said that no one has ever succeeded in teaching me a monoperspectival way of thinking. Korsakow is a tool that can also be used in a monoperspectival way. This is because the monoperspective is always part of the multi-perspective. It is just one of many perspectives. So Korsakow is not multi-perspectival per se, but it does afford a more multi-perspectival approach than legacy media does. The same applies to other potentially Korsakowian media such as YouTube, Twitter, or podcasts. Now, this is confusing in that at least podcasts are neither interactive nor nonlinear. The commonality is the digital. And I would like to speculate at this point that it might be especially the abundance of resources that allows us to not have to know in advance the outcome of a media production. And that makes the Korsakowian approach possible on a larger scale. Interactivity might be overrated, one could say. On the basis of this speculation, I would like to continue my research. So the title for this talk should have been the Korsakowian approach, a metamodern method that helps the thinking patterns of those who apply it. Thank you very much.